Idi Amin Dada Umi was a Ugandan military officer who served as the country's third president and de facto military dictator from 1971 until 1979. He is regarded as one of the world's most cruel despots. Amin died of kidney failure in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia in 2003 at the age of 77. After being expelled out of Uganda, he lived in Saudi Arabia and has been forbidden from ever returning. He passed away just a few days before his 78th birthday. What do we really know about this despotic leader? Here are some interesting facts you probably didn't know about Idi Amin. He was born in 1925 in Koboko. Amin did not write an autobiography or give his permission to publish a written account of his life. There are some inconsistencies in the dates and locations of his birth. According to most biographical accounts, he was born in 1925 in either Koboko or Kampala. Other unsubstantiated accounts place Amin's birth year anywhere between 1923 and 1928. Hussein Amin, Amin's son, claims that his father was born in Kampala in 1928. According to Fred Guadecco, a researcher at Makerere University, Amin was the son of Andreas Nyabiri, 1889 to 1976. Nyabiri, a Kakwa ethnic group member, converted to Islam from Roman Catholicism in 1910 and changed his name to Amin Dada. His firstborn son was named after him. Idi Amin grew up in a small farming village in northwestern Uganda with his mother's family after being abandoned by his father at an early age. Asa Aate, 1904 to 1970, an ethnic Lugbara and a traditional herbalist who treated members of Buganda nobility, among others, was Amin's mother, according to Guadecco. Amin has also been reported as being of mixed Kakwa-Nubian ancestry by other publications. Amin joined an Islamic school in Bombo in 1941. After a few years, he left school with only a fourth-grade English language education. He did odd jobs before being recruited to the army by a British colonial army officer. He was in the colonial British Army. Amin was promoted to Afande Class II, warrant officer, in the colonial British Army in 1959, the highest rank available for a black African at the time. On July 15, 1961, Amin returned to Uganda and got a short service appointment as a lieutenant, making him one of 2 Ugandans commissioned officers. He was sent to Uganda's Karamojong and Kenya's Turkana tribes to stop cattle rustling. According to researcher Holger Berndt Hansen, Amin's worldview, behavior, and communication methods were all shaped by his experiences in the colonial military. This included his direct and hands-on leadership style, which would eventually contribute to his popularity among certain parts of Ugandan society. He was also an athlete. Following Uganda's independence from the United Kingdom in 1962, Amin was promoted to captain, then major in 1963. In 1964, he was promoted to deputy commander of the army, and then to commander of the army the following year. He was elevated to commander-in-chief of the armed forces in 1970. During his time in the British and Ugandan armies, Amin was an athlete. He was the Ugandan light heavyweight boxing champion from 1951 to 1960, and a swimmer at 1.93 meters, 6 foot 4 inches tall, and strongly built. Amin was also a formidable rugby forward, although one officer said of him, "Idi Amin is a splendid type and a good rugby player, but virtually bone from the neck up and needs things explained in words of one letter." In the 1950s, he played for Nile RFC. The urban legend goes that he was chosen as a replacement for the East African Rugby Union squad for their tour match against the British Lions in 1955. On the other hand, Amin does not feature in the squad portrait or on the official roster. Following chats with a British Army colleague, Amin became a huge admirer of Hayes FC, which he held for the rest of his life. He was implicated in smuggling. Prime Minister Milton Obote and Idi Amin were both accused of smuggling ivory and gold into Uganda from the Democratic Republic of Congo in 1965. The exchange was part of a scheme to enable forces opposed to the Congolese government to barter ivory and gold for weaponry supplies secretly smuggled to them by Amin, according to General Nicholas Olenga, a colleague of former Congolese leader Patrice Lumumba. Uganda's parliament demanded a probe in 1966. Obote established a new constitution, eliminating Kabaka, King Mutesa II of Buganda's ceremonial presidency, and declaring himself executive president. Amin was elevated to colonel and army commander by him. Amin launched a raid on the Kabaka's palace, forcing Mutesa to flee to the United Kingdom, where he stayed until 1969. Amin began recruiting members of ethnic groups such as the Kakwa, Lugbara, South Sudanese, and others from the West Nile region bordering South Sudan. Since the early 20th century, South Sudanese have lived in Uganda, having arrived to serve in the colonial army. Many African ethnic groups live in both Uganda and South Sudan in northern Uganda, and rumors remain that Amin's army was primarily made up of South Sudanese soldiers. His clash with Prime Minister Obote geared him towards rebellion. The support Amin had acquired inside the Ugandan army through recruiting from the West Nile region, his involvement in operations to help the insurrection in southern Sudan, and an attempt on Obote's life in 1969, increased the divide between Amin and Obote. In October 1970, Obote assumed leadership of the armed forces, demoting Amin to the position of commander of the Ugandan army, which he had held for only a few months. Amin seized control in a military coup on January 25, 1971, while Obote was attending a Commonwealth Summit meeting in Singapore, after learning that Obote was intending to arrest him for misappropriating army funds. Amin's loyalists surrounded Entebbe International Airport and seized Kampala. Soldiers encircled Obote's home and shut down important highways. Obote's government was accused of corruption and preferential treatment of the Lango region in a broadcast on Radio Uganda. He seized powerfully after the clash. Following the radio transmission, cheering crowds were reported in Kampala's streets. Amin, who pretended to be a soldier rather than a politician, announced that the military government would only serve as a caretaker government until new elections could be conducted once the situation had stabilized. He stated that all political prisoners would be released. In April 1971, Amin held a state funeral for Edward Mutesa, the former king, Kabaka of Buganda, and president, who had died in exile. He also freed many political prisoners and reaffirmed his promise to hold free and fair elections in the shortest time possible to return the country to democratic rule. His military rule became supreme in the land. Amin declared himself President of Uganda, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Uganda Army Chief of Staff, and Chief of Air Staff on February 2, 1971. 1 week after the coup. He quickly suspended some portions of the Ugandan constitution and appointed himself as chairman of an advisory defense council of military officers. Amin elevated military tribunals above civil law, promoted soldiers to high-ranking government positions and parastatal institutions, and informed newly recruited civilian cabinet ministers that they would be subject to military courtesy. Amin ruled by decree, issuing roughly 30 decrees during the length of his reign. Amin renamed Kampala's presidential lodge, Government House, to the Command Post. He abolished the General Service Unit, GSU, a former government-created intelligence organization, and replaced it with the State Research Bureau, SRB. Over the next few years, the SRB headquarters in the Kampala neighborhood of Nakasero became the site of torture and executions. The military police and the public safety unit were also utilized to harass dissenters. He persecuted political and ethnic groups. In 1972, Amin retaliated against Ugandan exiles' attempted invasion by purging the Uganda army of Obote's sympathizers, primarily from the Acholi and Lango ethnic groupings. Lango and Acholi soldiers were massacred in the Jinja and Mbarara barracks in July 1971. 5,000 Acholi and Lango soldiers and at least twice as many civilians had vanished by early 1972. Other ethnic groups, religious leaders, journalists, artists, senior bureaucrats, judges, lawyers, students, and intellectuals, criminal suspects, and foreign nationals were among the victims. Many more people were killed for criminal reasons or simply at random in this environment of violence. Bodies were often dumped into the River Nile. He is also responsible for the killing of some notable figures in Uganda. During Amin's 8 years in power, the killings continued, driven by ethnic, political, and economic motivations. It is unknown how many people were killed. The death toll was estimated by the International Commission of Jurists to be no less than 80,000, and more likely approaching 300,000. According to an estimate compiled by exile organizations with the assistance of Amnesty International, 500,000 people have been killed. Benedicto Kiwanuka, the former Prime Minister and Chief Justice, Janani Luwum, the Anglican Archbishop, Joseph Mubiru, the former governor of Uganda's central bank, Frank Kalimuzo, the vice-chancellor of Makerere University, Byron Kawadwa, a prominent playwright, and 2 of Amin's own cabinet ministers, Erinayo Wilson Oriema and Charles Oboth Ofumbi, were among the prominent. He was later deposed in 1979. In January 1979, Nyerere, the president of Tanzania, mobilized the Tanzania People's Defense Force and counterattacked, joined by several groups of Ugandan exiles who had united as the Uganda National Liberation Army, UNLA. Despite military assistance from Libya's Muammar Gaddafi and the Palestine Liberation Organization, Amin's army retreated rapidly. During the war, the president is said to have traveled to other nations, such as Saudi Arabia and Iraq, in an attempt to mobilize greater foreign support. He made few public appearances in the closing months of his reign, but often spoke on radio and television. Following a major defeat in the Battle of Lukaya, Parts of the Uganda Army Command reportedly urged Amin to step down. He angrily refused and declared, "If you don't want to fight, I'll do it myself." He consequently fired Chief of Staff Yusuf Gowon. Amin was forced to flee the Ugandan capital by helicopter on April 11, 1979, when Kampala was captured. After a brief attempt in eastern Uganda to rally some remnants of the Uganda army, which included Amin announcing Jinja as the country's new capital, he withdrew into exile. Amin originally sought refuge in Libya, where he remained until 1980, before settling in Saudi Arabia. The Saudi royal family provided him with safety and a generous stipend in exchange for him staying out of politics. Amin lived on the top 2 floors of the Novotel Hotel on Palestine Road in Jeddah for years. He died of kidney failure. Amin's 4th wife, Nalongo Madina, reported him in a coma and near death from kidney failure at the King Faisal Specialist Hospital and Research Center in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, on July 19, 2003. She pleaded with Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni to let him stay in the country for the rest of his life. Amin will have to account for his faults the moment he was brought back, Museveni said. Amin's family eventually opted to turn off his life support, and he died on August 16, 2003, at a hospital in Jeddah. He was laid to rest in a humble cemetery in Jeddah's Ruwais Cemetery with no ceremony. David Owen disclosed after Amin's death that he had recommended having Amin assassinated during his time as British Foreign Secretary, 1977-79. "I'm not ashamed of thinking that, because his rule ranks alongside Pol Pot as one of the worst of all African regimes," he has maintained. Conclusion. What do you think about the despotic life of Idi Amin? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below.